All right, so we're going to continue to work on some anatomy post-midterm. What we're going to be discussing for the second half of the course is going to be the nervous system and special senses. So in order to really get into the crux of the nervous system and talk about exactly what is happening here, we need to be able to organize it in a couple of different ways. So we'll run through that as we get through the lecture today. But this is an overview of what we're going to be doing. Essentially what you're going to need to do is separate the nerve central, the peripheral, and then create your own outline and be able to put the different components of the nervous system into those separate systems. So that's actually going to be a question that you will run into on exam number 3, and then again, I'm sure you'll find something similar on the final exam as well. So classifying the nervous system is going to be very important. We'll discuss the different cells of the nervous system, and you're going to want to know what is in the central nervous system, what's in the peripheral nervous system, and what they are doing in each area. We'll be talking about the membrane potentials, which we had started talking about when we discussed the muscles and the neuromuscular junction. And this is going to be discussing the principles of electricity, resting membrane potential, and how that's activated to send signals down the nerves to activate other cells in the body. So the nervous system, what is it? Well, we had talked about it the first day of class when we discussed receptors, control centers, and effector cells. So as you can see, literally, no pun intended, there's a glass of water here. This person is seeing that, and how they do so, and this is more complicated than this picture here, and we're going to talk about that when we get to special senses. But this person will see, or they have some sort of sensory receptor that is activated, sends a signal to the central nervous system. In this case, it is going to be the brain or the occipital lobe, where you are going to integrate that information, and then you're going to send that information to a motor output. So this can be a 2-neuron signal from a sensory input to a motor output, but more often than not, it's a 3 or more neuron signal or neuron chain that is going to allow for this type of communication and reaction. So this is an oversimplification of the nervous system. You get some information that's brought into the body, it's sent to the brain. The brain is then going to figure out what to do with that information and send some motor output or some response. So it can be a contraction of a muscle, it can be a turning off or shutting off, turning on or shutting down certain organs, etc. There's lots of different responses, but those are going to be the broad ones. So how do we divide the nervous system? Well, the easiest way to do this is to divide it into the central and the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is going to be the brain, the spinal cord. Those are going to be the integration centers, the control centers. Okay, everything else is going to be the peripheral nervous system, and that is going to be everything outside of the spinal cord and everything outside of the brain itself. So if it's not protected by the skull, it's not protected by the spinal canal, the vertebral canal, then it is going to be part of the peripheral nervous system. So those are going to be the sensory and the motor neurons. So that's every neuron that is going to sense the environment and then react to it. Everything that is going to integrate would be part of the central nervous system. Okay, so what we break down the peripheral nervous system into is the afferent and the efferent division. The afferent is going to be all the information that is going to come into the central nervous system. So those are going to be all of your different receptors. The efferent are going to be all of the different motor neurons. So they are going to be the effector cells. So hence the efferent is the effectors. Okay. The efferent can then be broken down even further into the somatic versus the autonomic nervous system. And what we're going to discuss primarily first is going to be the somatic nervous system. Afterwards, we're going to discuss the autonomic nervous system, which will then break down further into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. And so you've heard me reference those before. Those are going to be your fight or flight and your rest and digest responses. So you have one or the other going at all times throughout your day. And we're going to get really deep into that at some point. But your sympathetic is going to be your fight or flight. Your parasympathetic is going to be your rest and digest response. So here is the full breakdown. You're going to want to become very familiar with this chart and know what could be part of those divisions. So here's the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord, which goes down to L1, L2. So that's everything within the vertebral canal. Okay, so that's your central nervous system. Everything else is going to be peripheral. So any nerve that goes to your stomach or to your skin, to your muscles, etc., those are going to be part of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, now you can break that down into either the afferent or the efferent division. And if you want to make it easier, afferent is sensory, efferent is motor, or again, the effector division. The effector division is going to then be divided into the somatic and the autonomic. Somatic is going to be everything that you voluntarily control. That would be your muscles, and that would also even be your skin, things like the muscles from your erector pili, although those can also be controlled by the autonomic nervous system, as well as the autonomic nervous system would be things like the somatic, the heart, the bladder, the stomach, all of the different organs that are going to be in your digestive tract, your respiratory tract, and your urogenital tract. Okay, and then we break that further down into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. So all of these in the motor division are going to be signals that come from the central nervous system out. And so we're going to spend the next few lectures discussing what all of that means, but get very familiar with those divisions and understand what is coming where. Okay, so here is an even more in-depth look at those systems. So your central nervous system has the brain, the spinal cord, and that will be your control centers and your integration. Okay. Peripheral is cranial nerves, spinal nerves. You're going to learn about all those different nerves in the next few lectures. In fact, we're going to talk about the 12 different cranial nerves. You have 12 pairs of them. And then the spinal nerves, they are going to be 8 in the cervical region, 12 in the thoracic region, 5 in the lumbar region, 5 in the sacral region, and then the coccygeal. So there are several different spinal nerves, and then those break off into peripheral nerves. So there's the two divisions, the sensory, somatic and visceral sensory. So all of the different receptors that are throughout your body are in that division. So we don't really break down the somatic and visceral into different categories, although they still would be. You're getting your somatic sensation from your skin, from your muscles, and then the visceral sensory would be the unconscious information that you're getting from things like your stomach and your liver and the distension in your small intestines, and those can relate to the brain and create different signal responses according to the signal that's being sent. So they all conduct impulses from the receptors to the central nervous system. They do not dictate what happens, but they are sending that information to the brain for the brain to decide how it should react. Okay, so you get that sensation from the somatic sensor, goes into the spinal cord. It can either synapse there and come right back out, or it can go up into the brain, go through integration, let the brain decide what's happening, come back down, and then come out as a motor division, which would be this motor nerve fiber. It conducts impulses from the central nervous system to effectors. Efferent is effectors. Okay, so they're creating some response here. Okay, so they can either go to the somatic or the autonomic. Okay, if you want to think of autonomic as kind of an automatic, that's unconscious thought processes. So it's something that you don't control. Like you don't control your heart rate, for example, not consciously at least. You don't sit around having a conversation telling your heart to beat. You wouldn't be able to carry on a conversation with that. The somatic nervous system would be voluntary. Okay, though some of those programs can be on more of a subconscious level, like standing is voluntary muscles. But once you learn that habit, your brain kind of takes that on autopilot, so that you don't even have to do this. Think about driving into school. If you're driving into class, do you remember every single off ramp that you pass, or do you just know that you're getting off at the correct off ramp? Your brain goes into this autopilot mode because it's done it several times. I'm sure that you've all done it where you've gotten in the car and started driving, and you end up at work when you're supposed to when you're going somewhere close by. I know I've gotten on the freeway going the wrong direction, heading into my office when I should be heading into school. You pull off because you're and you head the right direction because you're on autopilot. So voluntary is kind of a loose terminology, but this is conducting impulses from the central nervous system to the skeletal muscles, and it's going to tell those muscles to contract in their normal pattern. So that's the bringing your glass of water from the table up to your mouth. Autonomic nervous system is going to be your visceral motor, which is going to be involuntary. So that would be your respiratory, your cardiovascular system, your digestive, and then it would also be your urogenital. Okay, it conducts impulses from the central nervous system to cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, glands. So you're either going to contract, relax, or secrete. Those are going to be the primary objectives of the autonomic nervous system. And again, we're going to have a lot of fun when we get into the autonomic nervous system and discuss exactly what is happening. Now you have the sympathetic, which is going to be mobilized in body systems during activity. That would be your fight or flight response. So if you are trying to run away from a lion, okay, you're going to shut down certain systems in your body so that you can deal with the immediate threat, which is getting away from something that wants to eat you. You're not going to worry so much about digesting the food that is in your stomach, because if you don't get away from that danger, then you become somebody else's food. Okay, so that is how the sympathetic division works. You shut down your digestive system, you increase your cardiovascular, you increase your respiratory, so that you can get away from danger. Whereas your parasympathetic system is going to do the opposite. You're going to shut down your skeletal or your cardiovascular system. Not shut it down, but you're going to bring the heart rate down. You're going to bring the blood pressure down. This would be your rest and digest response. So when you're sleeping, when you're laying on the couch reading, playing with a phone, having a conversation, those are going to be parasympathetic controls. So this is to conserve energy and to heal the body. So this is housekeeping functions during rest. If you are sick, your body is supposed to go into this parasympathetic division so that you're able to fight off whatever is in your system. However, most over-the-counter medications will actually activate this sympathetic division, which will mask a lot of the symptoms so that your body keeps moving even though it's trying to rest. Okay, so nervous system has three overlapping functions. Which of the following represents a logical sequence of these three functions? So say you see a glass of water. What will the process be in order to pick up that glass of water? Well, you have to go through sensory input first, then you have to integrate that information, and then you can pick up that glass of water. Okay? You wouldn't go through picking it up and then figuring out what you're doing afterwards. You actually have to go through this process in order to make it happen. So while studying for an exam, you reach for a beverage. To extend your arm, your blank nervous system is activated. Okay. This one is going to be the somatic. So afferent is going to be the sensation. Okay, so that is going to be the receptors that see the beverage. The autonomic would be the subconscious systems. So unless you are trying to increase your heart rate to get that beverage, that shouldn't be activated. The sympathetic would be the fight or flight, and it's not any sort of life or death circumstance to reach for something to drink. Although a lot of times studying for an exam, we will get that sympathetic system activated because of anxiety. Okay, so the door slams shut loudly and you flinch. After a few seconds, you realize that your heart is beating very rapidly and forcefully. This response is a result of your what system? Well, as we just discussed, that would be your autonomic or your sympathetic system, which is a division of your autonomic. The afferent is going to be the hearing of the door slamming. Okay, central nervous system is going to integrate that information, and the somatic is going to just be that'll be the skeletal muscles causing you to jump or flinch. Okay, but to get the heart beating faster, that'd be your autonomic nervous system. Okay. So we're going to briefly discuss this tissue histology, and then we'll take a little break, and I'll put up another video of the next section here. So these are going to be different supporting cells within the nervous system. Now the typical cell that we talk about is going to be the neuron. Okay, that is going to be the functional cell that is going to send signals from one part of the body to another. But they need other cells surrounding them in order to function properly. So these are known as neuroglial cells. Okay, they're supporting cells. So there's 10 to 1. So 10 neuroglial cells to 1 neuron. Well, since neurons do not replicate themselves, they do not divide, you don't create new neurons through lifetime. What you are born with, you maintain, and if it dies, it does not grow back. So you need to support them and make sure that they are functioning properly. Now, the cool thing about the neurons is that they will constantly be forming new interactions with other neurons around them that will help you create new memories. It helps you create new habits, and helps you to gain information and retain that information. That would be the memory. Okay, so there's 4 different supporting cells in your central nervous system. And that's going to be your astrocyte, your microglial, your oligodendrocyte, and your ependymal cells. Okay, and we'll discuss what each of those does in just a bit. And then you have 2 of them in your peripheral nervous system, your satellite cells, which surround the cell body, and your Schwann cells. Okay, your Schwann cells are going to be similar to the oligodendrocytes that are within the central nervous system, in that they create a myelin sheath around your nerve fiber. The oligodendrocytes will do the same in the central nervous system. They're creating the myelin sheath, which actually is going to be an insulator speeding up the signal transfer from one end of the neuron to the other end of the neuron. So it allows that information to travel significantly faster, so that you have better reaction times, and that you just communicate more rapidly. So your neurons, the signal will actually travel at about 180 miles per hour, which is really quick. That's faster than you can drive to get to school. So I thought that was kind of fun. Your satellite cells are going to be supporting your cell body. Okay, and this is going to be an example of a pseudo-unipolar neuron, because it's going to have, well, one pole here, and we'll discuss how you we'll put this into a different category as we get a little bit deeper into lecture. Okay, but your satellite cells are going to be surrounding that cell body to support it and make sure that it is nourished and maintained. Your ependymal cells are going to line your cerebrospinal fluid-filled cavities to make sure that you have proper cerebrospinal fluid in the brain, so in the spinal cord, so that they have enough nourishment. The astrocytes are going to be, well, they look like stars or asterisks, and they have little feet that are going to hold on to the dendrites of the neuron, which are going to be the little hairs at one end of the neuron, and it's also going to surround the blood vessels that are going to be found in the brain, creating what's known as a blood-brain barrier, because you need to protect your neurons more than any other cell in your body, because they don't grow back. If you damage your skin cells, well, guess what? You're creating new skin cells daily, so your body is able to replenish and replace those. If you lose those neurons, then you're not going to be able to restore those. So we need to be really careful. So the blood-brain barrier only allows certain things into the cerebrospinal fluid close to the neurons. So glucose would be one of those, and then fat-soluble substances. So most drugs won't be able to cross that blood-brain barrier except for some anesthetics and alcohol. Microglial cells are going to be defense cells, so they're part of the immune system. And so they're going to be there just in case something gets past that blood-brain barrier, so that it can fight it off before it does any damage to the neurons. Okay, so your neurons, they're going to be your excitable cells that transmit electrical signals, and where they travel to and what neurotransmitter they release is going to determine the signal that they send, whether it's going to increase or decrease what the following cell does. So your neuron can get a signal from the environment or from another neuron, and then it can be sending to another neuron, a muscle, a gland, etc. Okay, so there's different areas that your neurons will travel. Okay, but a lot of the connections are going to be neuron to neuron. Okay, so here are the different central nervous system neuroglial cells. So the astrocytes are going to be cells that we talk about quite a bit, because it is, again, maintaining that blood-brain barrier. It supports the neurons within the central nervous system. It anchors them so that when you do have some shifting in the brain, that they don't move too much, and then hence they won't be damaged. And maintaining that chemical environment so that, again, you don't have too much or too little glucose in the system, that they maintain that blood-brain barrier, and they very closely monitor what can get into the environment with the central nervous system and what stays out. Microglial cells, if you do get any bacteria or virus past that blood-brain barrier, they can be the last line of defense to make sure that there's nothing that is harming that nervous system. The ependymal cells will create the cerebrospinal fluid and maintain it at the proper levels, and that is going to be the fluid that surrounds the brain and the spinal cord, nourishes it, has the right amount of glucose and calcium, etc., all the different ions in the proper concentrations. And then the oligodendrocytes will myelinate those neurons so that you maintain the proper signals in the speed of the signals within the central nervous system. Okay, and the peripheral nervous system, satellite cells are going to be similar to the astrocytes. They nourish and maintain the cells. They make sure that they are supported, and the Schwann cells are going to be essentially what oligodendrocytes are to the central nervous system. Schwann cells are to the peripheral nervous system. So they are going to myelinate the axons of these neurons. And since the peripheral nervous system neurons can be significantly longer than the central nervous system neurons, you're going to have these little gaps between them, and these are known as nodes of Ranvier, which allow your signal to skip significant portions of the neuron, again speeding up the signal. Okay, so what actually is the neuron? Well, this is going to be your typical neuron, where you have the cell body at one end, you have an axon, which is like the stalk, and then you have the terminal of the axon at the end here. Okay, so the axon terminal is where you will release that neurotransmitter, and that will go to another neuron, to a muscle, or to a gland of some sort throughout your body. So you're getting these myelinations, which don't occur at every neuron, but they do occur at many of them. So you get the signal from the cell body, from the dendrites. Those are going to be the receiving ends of the neuron. They're going to start this action potential, which is going to go down the entire length of the axon and then cause a release of a neurotransmitter at the terminal. So the cell body doesn't always have to be by the dendrites. This is a typical neuron, but you can also have the cell body here in the middle with an axon at each end, or an axon like we saw with that pseudo-unipolar, where the cell body is here, then you have an axon over here, and an axon over there, and I'll show a picture of that in a little while. Okay, so the dendrites, you can see, are quite extensive. So you're getting a signal from all the surrounding tissues surrounding that cell body. So these dendrites can actually form new connections. So some cells, some neurons might have 3, 4, 5 dendrites. Some of them might have thousands of dendrites, so that they interact with thousands of different neurons in the area. You might only have a receptive region that is going to measure for a pressure change or a temperature change, and so you don't need quite as many dendrites, but you have to have very specialized, specific receptive regions. Okay? And then these are going to be your myelin sheaths. Again, they are broken into pieces, kind of like a beads on a chain, and they allow that signal to skip these insulated regions, and that speeds up the signal, because they only have to, instead of going through, say this is 10 centimeters, instead of having to speed through 10 centimeters, you go through 1, 2, 3, 4, you skip 8 of the 10 centimeters, which significantly decreases the amount of space that you have to go through. Okay. So there are 2 different transports along the axon. You can either go anterograde, which is from the dendrites down to the axon terminal. That could be your mitochondria, it can be your enzymes, and of course it can be the action potential as well, because you're going from one end to the end. So anterior mitochondria to regions in the axon that need more ATP energy. They need to create more proteins. Okay, and enzymes, which are going to be created from the cell body, can be transported down from the cell body along the axon as well, because you're going to keep the production of enzymes and proteins closest to the nucleus, where you have the DNA, which will transcribe into RNA, which will translate into proteins. So the enzymes are easier to move than the nuclei, the DNA, the RNA, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, etc. And you can get retrograde transport, which is going to bring waste back towards the cell body so that you can release that into the bloodstream. And then advice. So something is damaged, okay? If your axon has been ruptured for some reason, or you're not getting the signal through, you can get that advice back to the cell body, so you can correct something, or some healing or more enzymes down to the axon terminal. Okay. So myelination is going to be an insulator. And insulation means that you're going to be able to skip those segments. Okay, the Schwann cells are going to create the myelin in the peripheral nervous system, where the oligodendrocytes are going to create the myelin in the central nervous system. Okay, those nodes around Ranvier are going to be the little holes between the myelination, which will allow it again to skip segments of the nerve or the neuron. Okay. In the central nervous system, we actually have what's known as white and gray matter. Myelin is a fat, okay? So the myelin is going to be a white matter within the brain, whereas gray matter is going to be the cell body collections, okay? So we talk about gray matter as being the cortex of the brain, and then it's actually going to be the inside of the spinal cord. And so when we get into the different lectures discussing the brain and the spinal cord, you'll see the difference between the two. So those are going to be cell body collections, whereas the white matter is going to be mostly made of axons. Okay? So this is what the Schwann cells will essentially do. They'll envelop an axon and they'll wind around until they squeeze out most of the fluid, and now it's insulating that axon, so you can't send an action potential through. So you get an action potential up to the myelin, and then it's going to skip to the next segment. Okay. So complete the following analogy. Electrical wire is to electrical tape as peripheral neurons are to, well, that would be the Schwann cells, because they are going to be the insulators. Okay, so it'll do what electrical tape does to electrical wire. Make sure that they contain that signal. Each neuron in our bodies has a lifespan of, well, an average human lifespan. You don't have these lifespans like you do in other cells. Okay, so we're going to stop there and we're going to pick up in the next lecture.